When Clint Eastwood walked into her section, Mia had no idea her life was about to change forever. She adjusted her apron and stole a quick glance at the clock hanging above the diner's counter. 6:57 p.m. The dinner rush was slowing down, giving her a moment to catch her breath. For most people, this little roadside diner was nothing more than a pit stop, a place to grab a bite before continuing their journey. But for Mia, it was everything. At 28, she was a single mother working long hours to provide for her 6-year-old son, Jordan. Every tip, every paycheck went toward their tiny apartment, school supplies, and just keeping life moving forward. She had learned early on that the world wasn't always fair, but giving up was never an option. As she moved from table to table, flashing the same warm smile she'd mastered over the years, the bell above the door chimed. Another customer. Mia turned, expecting the usual: a trucker, a weary traveler, maybe a couple passing through. But instead, a man walked in, carrying himself with a quiet confidence that made the air feel heavier. He wore a simple button-up shirt and jeans, his face partially hidden by the brim of his hat. At first, he was just another customer. But then he glanced her way, and that's when she knew. Clint Eastwood. Her breath caught in her throat. The Clint Eastwood. The man her late father used to talk about every time they watched old westerns together. He was a legend, an icon, someone she never imagined she'd see in person, let alone serve. Should I keep going? Taking a deep breath, Mia grabbed her notepad and approached his booth. Up close, she noticed the little details. His hands, slightly weathered but steady, resting on the table. His piercing eyes, sharp even under the shadow of his hat. When he looked up at her, his expression was unreadable. "Good evening," she said, surprised at how steady her voice was. "What can I get started for you?" He glanced at the menu for barely a second before setting it aside. "Just a coffee and a burger, medium rare, no onions. Simple enough." Mia jotted down his order, but she couldn't ignore the faint tremor in her hands. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Busy night?" She blinked. Most customers didn't bother with small talk unless they were regulars. "Not too bad," she replied with a small smile. "Keeps me on my toes." He nodded. "You've got a good pace. Not easy to keep up in a place like this." Was he complimenting her? Clint Eastwood, a man she had only ever seen on a movie screen, had just acknowledged her work ethic. She managed a polite smile before heading to the counter, but her mind raced. Why was he here? Of all places, why a tiny diner off the highway? He could afford the most luxurious restaurants in California, yet here he was, drinking coffee from a chipped mug like any other traveler. When the order was ready, Mia carefully carried the plate and coffee to his table. As she set them down, she caught a brief but appreciative glance from him. "Thank you," he said simply. "You're welcome." She tried to sound casual, but something about this moment felt different, almost significant. She continued with her shift, refilling coffee cups, clearing tables, and taking orders, but every now and then, her eyes drifted back to Clint's booth. He ate slowly, almost as if he had all the time in the world. And every so often their eyes met, just for a second, before he nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement that sent a strange flutter through her chest. "Should I keep going?" When he finished, Clint raised a hand, signaling for her. Mia wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Perfect," he said, offering a small smile. "That was one of the best burgers I've had in a long time." She chuckled. "I'll let the cook know. He'll love to hear that." Clint didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied her, his eyes holding something she couldn't quite place. "You've got a good energy about you," he said after a moment. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." Mia blinked. Was that a compliment? A memory? She couldn't tell. "Well, thank you," she managed, feeling her cheeks warm. "I just try to get through the day like everyone else." "That's the trick, isn't it?" he said, his voice quieter this time. "Just getting through." Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills, placing them on the table along with a folded piece of paper. "Keep the change," he said as he stood up. "And read this when you get a moment." Mia stared at the note, her heart pounding. "Thank you," she said softly, but he was already walking toward the door. The bell chimed as he left, and just like that, he was gone. For a long moment she stood frozen by the booth, staring at the note as if it might disappear. What could he have possibly written? Why did he want her to read it? But her shift wasn't over yet. There were still tables to serve, and Mia wasn't the type to leave her duties unfinished, no matter how much her hands itched to unfold that note. It wasn't until later, when the diner had emptied and the last coffee cups had been cleared, that Mia finally slipped into the back room. With trembling fingers she unfolded the paper, and what she read made her breath hitch. "Dear Mia, I don't know much about you, but in the short time I've been here, I've seen something rare, true resilience. Watching how you manage this place with grace, even under pressure, is a reminder of how much strength exists in the everyday heroes of this world. You remind me of someone very dear to me, someone who taught me the value of hard work and kindness. I don't know your story, but I can see in your eyes that you've carried more than your share of burdens. That's why I want to do something. No strings attached." Mia's hands shook as she continued reading. "I'm leaving a small gesture for you to use however you see fit. Whether it's for your child, your future, or simply a moment of rest. I hope it brings you some peace. People like you deserve to be seen. And I see you." Folded inside the note was a check. Mia's heart nearly stopped when she saw the amount. $10,000. Her knees buckled and she sank onto the bench, tears slipping down her face. It wasn't just the money, though that alone was life-changing. It was the words, the recognition, the feeling that someone, Clint Eastwood of all people, had taken the time to see her, to care. Should I keep going? This was more than a gift. It was a turning point. Mia sat in silence, clutching the note, knowing that her life would never be the same. And from that moment on, she decided, she wouldn't just survive, she would thrive. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a little inspiration today. Mia never expected her life to change in a single evening. The diner she worked at was nothing special, a small, cozy place tucked away off the highway, where travelers and truckers stopped for a quick meal before continuing their journey. But for Mia, this diner was more than just a job. It was survival. At 28, she had been working double shifts to support her 6-year-old son, Jordan. Every dollar she earned went toward their tiny apartment, school supplies, and food. She had no safety net, no luxury of slowing down. Life had been an uphill battle since she was a teenager, and she had learned early on that the world didn't offer second chances. So she kept pushing forward, one exhausting day at a time. The evening had been ordinary, plates clinking, coffee pouring, the murmur of customers lost in their meals. The dinner rush had slowed, giving Mia a moment to breathe as she adjusted her apron and glanced at the clock. Almost 7 p.m. The shift would be over in a couple of hours, and then she could go home, tuck Jordan into bed, and get a few hours of sleep before doing it all over again. Then, the bell above the diner door chimed and everything changed. Mia looked up, expecting another weary traveler, but instead, a man walked in with a quiet presence that seemed to shift the atmosphere. He wasn't flashy or attention-seeking, but there was something about him that made the air feel heavier. He wore a simple button-up shirt and jeans, his weathered face partially hidden beneath the brim of a hat pulled low over his eyes. He carried himself with a confidence that wasn't loud but undeniable. It took Mia a moment to place him, but when he glanced her way, her breath hitched. Clint Eastwood. She had grown up watching his movies with her father, their Sunday tradition. Westerns, action films, stories about men who carried the weight of the world in their eyes. Her father had idolized Clint, always saying, "That man doesn't just act, he becomes the story." And now he was here, in her diner. Mia wasn't the type to fawn over celebrities. She had neither the time nor the energy for it. But this was different. This was someone who had shaped memories with her father, someone who had been a part of her childhood without even knowing it. Clint settled into a corner booth, and Mia knew it would be her turn to serve him. This wasn't just another customer. Something about his quiet presence made her pulse quicken. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her notepad and approached his table. As she got closer, she noticed the subtle details, the way his hands, slightly weathered but steady, rested on the table, how his piercing eyes seemed to take in everything without revealing much in return. He looked up as she stopped beside him, his expression unreadable. "Good evening," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "What can I get started for you?" He glanced at the menu briefly before setting it aside. "Just a coffee and a burger. Medium rare. No onions. Simple, straight to the point." Just like she imagined he'd be. Mia jotted it down, but she couldn't ignore the faint tremor in her hand as she turned to leave. Before she could take a step, Clint's voice stopped her. "Busy night?" She turned back, surprised. Most customers didn't bother with small talk unless they were regulars. "Not too bad," she replied, offering a small smile. "Keeps me on my toes." He nodded slightly. "You've got a good pace. Not easy to keep up in a place like this." Mia blinked, unsure how to respond. Was Clint Eastwood complimenting her? Noticing her work ethic? She managed a polite smile before retreating to the counter to put in his order. But her mind raced. Why was he here, in this tiny roadside diner, when he could afford the most expensive restaurants in California? What had brought him to her world? When his order was ready, Mia carefully carried the plate and coffee to his table. She set them down, catching a brief appreciative glance from him. "Thank you," he said simply. "You're welcome," she replied, trying to sound casual. But there was something about this moment that felt different. Important. As she continued serving other customers, she noticed that Clint wasn't in any rush to eat. He sat there, almost contemplative, sipping his coffee as if he had nowhere else to be. Every so often their eyes would meet, and he would give her a polite nod. It made her stomach flutter in a way she couldn't explain. When he finished his meal, Clint raised a hand slightly to get her attention. Mia wiped her hands on her apron and walked over, careful to keep her expression composed. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Perfect," he said with a small smile. "That was one of the best burgers I've had in a long time." Mia chuckled lightly, caught off guard by the compliment. "Well, I'll let the cook know. He'll appreciate hearing that." For a moment Clint didn't say anything. He simply looked at her, and in that brief silence, she felt like he was studying her. Not in a judgmental way, but with a curiosity that made her feel exposed, yet seen. "You've got a good energy about you," he said finally. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." Mia blinked, unsure how to respond. Was this a compliment? A memory? She couldn't tell. "Well, thank you," she managed, feeling her cheeks warm. "I just try to get through the day like everyone else." He nodded, his eyes glinting with something she couldn't quite place. "That's the trick, isn't it? Just getting through." Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills. He placed them on the table along with a folded piece of paper. "Keep the change," he said, standing up. "And read this when you get a moment." Mia stared at the note, her heart pounding. "Thank you," she said softly, unsure if he even heard her as he walked toward the door. The bell above it jingled as he left, and just like that, he was gone. For a few moments she stood frozen, staring at the note as if it might burn her fingers. What could he have possibly written? And why did he seem so intent on her reading it? But the questions would have to wait. There were still tables to serve, and Mia wasn't the type to leave her duties unfinished, even if her mind was racing with anticipation. That night, after her shift ended and Jordan was asleep, Mia finally unfolded the note. As she read the words scrawled in Clint Eastwood's unmistakable handwriting, her breath caught in her throat. Mia, sometimes life doesn't give us second chances, but sometimes we make our own. Keep pushing forward. You've got more in you than you know. Clint? Her hands trembled slightly as she held the note. It wasn't just a message. It was a reminder. A nudge from someone who had lived 1,000 lives on screen, and perhaps carried the weight of just as many in reality. And in that moment, Mia knew. Her story wasn't over. It was just beginning. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with everyone.